Shalom, friends, and I'm glad you're with me once again. I've been reading, just began really, a small volume by a colleague, Rabbi Sharon Brous, who's the rabbi of an absolutely wonderful congregation in Los Angeles, California. Her book is titled The Amen Effect. And she speaks in the beginning of her book about the power of community. What does it mean to be in community? Enduring words, important words, but it made me also realize that in truth, all of us are always living with a sense of grief. That is an enduring truth about life. At one moment or another, we are grieving changes that happen to us in our life almost constantly. Moving from our homes of birth, to college, to work, whatever route we are on, there will be multiple points within our lives when we feel a sense of loss. And yes, that includes the loss we feel when the physical presence of someone who we love and someone who is close to us is no longer with us. Our Jewish tradition is concerned about grief and is concerned about how we handle moments of grief. I'll come back to that in a moment. But there are things that we do in the world that might help us handle this sense of grief that accompanies us on our life journey. Perhaps, let me suggest that one of the most important ways of coping with this feeling of grief, of loss. Perhaps it's a job, perhaps it's a physical ability, perhaps it's a cognitive ability, perhaps it is a career, or perhaps it is a disappointment of some other sort. But one way of handling that would be to share and talk and express feelings with close friends, with partners, to be in conversation with community. And sometimes, often, with counselors or therapists who can help us process the feelings that are within us. You see, having other people to bounce our ideas, our thoughts, our loss is helpful because we recognize that in moments of grief, we are not alone. Another strategy for dealing with loss and grief is to find some way to help us feel productive. Now, that might be as simple as cultivating a garden, doing art or crafts, or perhaps taking on a volunteer position in the community. There are many, many activities that one might do to assist in that feeling of being productive. But when we as human beings are productive, volunteering or helping or distributing food or whatever it is that we find ourselves doing, then our focus changes from an inward focus to a focus that is outward. And all of a sudden, our grief is transformed. Doesn't go away, but our grief is transformed as we interact in a productive way with the world in some way or another. And finally, there is physical activity. For we are, in fact, animals that thrive in some sort of physical activity, whether it be simply exercising or moving or taking oneself to the grocery store or, of course, to the synagogue, to classes or services, whatever you might do. Simply going and doing and being out there and moving is one way of coping with the inevitability of grief. After all, if we are living and breathing in human beings, we are also aging. And aging brings its own kind of grief. Whether you're aging from adolescence into adulthood, or from adulthood into seniorhood. The mourner's kaddish that we're about to do in just a moment is a unique opportunity. In Jewish tradition, we say the mourner's kaddish regularly with a minyan, with a minimum of 10 people in services, where we rise and say these words. Now, the words themselves have nothing to do with grief or loss or death. And in fact, I would say the words themselves are really less important than the idea of standing up and realizing that whatever grief we feel, there are those around us who feel exactly the same thing. We're not alone. We are joined in the grief of life with many others. And our tradition's brilliance is to remind us every time we stand to say the mourner's kaddish, we're not alone. This is not a prayer to say alone. This is a prayer we say as a community, as a group, comforting each other. And so with that, I invite you now to the mourner's kaddish. Yitgadal v'yitgadash shemei Rabbah. Bi'alma divra kirutei v'yamlich malchutei. B'chayechon v'yomechon v'chayei dechol Beit Yisrael. Ba'agala v'izman kariv v'imru amen. Yehi shmei Rabbah mevarach le'olam le'amei almaya. Yitbarach v'yishtabach v'yitpoar v'yitramam v'yitnaseh. V'yidadar v'yidaleh v'yidalal shemei d'kudisha barichu. Li'ela min kol berchata v'shirata. Tushbechata v'nechamata damiran be'alma v'imru amen. Yehi shlomo Rabbah min shemaya. V'chayim oleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'imru amen. Aseh shalom b'imramav. Hu ya'aseh shalom.